Check 1, 2, check.
Honored to have Andrew join us this evening. I'm passing it over to you, Andrew.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. That is a very, very kind introduction. But it really is actually my pleasure to be with all of you tonight to talk about, well, I mean, you said passionate. That's certainly something that I am very much so for the industry that we are all in together. I think, you know, the importance of agriculture, I think all of us know just how important it is and what the possibilities are here in Ontario and across the country. To be able to talk about that is just something that really excites me. To be able to talk to you guys and talk to kind of fellow young farmers, you know, is even more fascinating to me and even more fun to just share some experiences and share some ideas. Now, to kind of give you an idea, as Kathy mentioned, I am a farmer myself, as you can see by a couple of pictures. I'll give you one guess as to what we do. We milk cows is kind of job number one around here. It's the farm that I grew up on, that my mom grew up on. So I am third generation dairy farmer, although, you know, different kinds of farming go back as far back as we've got written in our genealogy. And then we also grow some grains here west of London. Corn, soybeans, wheat, and hay are the main crops. It's one of those jobs for me that, I mean, I came back to the farm after spending a few years away from it. My education actually happens to be in journalism. That was what I actually wanted to do as kind of a teenager, was be in the world of news. I loved watching the news and reading the paper and, you know, all sorts of things that every 14 and 15-year-old kid wants to do, I'm sure, these days. But it was something that I was really excited about, and that's what I did for, you know, a few years before. As exciting as it was a job that was very focused on an urban environment. You know, jobs in Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal and places like that, and I am not a city guy whatsoever. Plus, you know, you grow up and you realize that farming, you know, it's kind of in your blood and something that you want to do and be able to run your own business and make your own decisions and do all sorts of things like that. So, you know, that was also one of the big reasons that I decided that coming home to farm was kind of where we wanted to be. So that's a little bit of background on me. The other thing, and Kathy mentioned more about that, is kind of on that social media advocacy element, that storytelling element, is something that I really enjoy doing. I, you know, love showing off, you know, what was first kind of our farm and some of the things we do to, you know, part of it was just to, you know, get people interested and give people an idea of where their food comes from and what a farm like ours looks like. But also part of that obviously comes around that, you know, that misconception or those, you know, perception issues that I think we may all face in agriculture and all face in farming. That idea that, you know, maybe our customer, maybe our consumer doesn't understand every practice we do. Maybe they have concerns about specific practices, you know, whatever that looks like. I thought there was a role that maybe I could play in, you know, trying to help people understand that. The next step of that was doing those 52 videos over 52 weeks that I wrapped up at the end of last year. A really cool project that kind of came about from the idea that, well, I always joked that my cows got tired of me taking their picture all the time and that I should expand my horizon a bit. And that was a lot, had to do with just giving people an idea that, they knew what my farm looked like. They didn't know necessarily what a pepper farm looked like or a beef farm looked like, or a, one that's doing processing or, different types of operations. So that was one thing that I wanted to do more. The exciting part about it is that I met a pile of young farmers on those travels, not necessarily, on purpose. Certainly some of them were ones that I knew. Some of them were definitely more comfortable, reaching out to me to say they'd like to invite me to the farm and show me around and, be included in that. But part of it too is just, there's a lot of excitement in agriculture amongst young farmers, and, they're passionate to share their story. Around here, between the farm, my wife and I, we also have a little communications company, and she does quite a bit of writing for it. And one of the things she does is she talks to young farmers on a regular basis to share some of their stories for a few different projects. So between the two of us, I haven't even added up the number of young farmers, but, we'll be, well over 100, probably closer to 200 young farmers that we have different profiles for, or pictures, or, that we've had pretty in-depth discussions about to talk about, what farms looks like, what concerns them, different things. So that's really what I want to take a lot of the time tonight to talk about is, what some of those profiles look like. What are some of the common threads between all of us as young farmers? But then also, what are some of the kind of unique stories that a few of these people have to give people a better idea of, maybe there's an idea that could fit their own farm or their own idea for, starting or advancing the business. So that's what I kind of want to do. We do have a chat box in here, in the chat section. And as Kathy put in there, I just will open it up here, is the chat section that you can feel free to join in, ask questions, make comments. I don't always have the best habit of looking directly at that screen. I've got kind of my notes spread across my desk here, but I will do my best. The first question, what is your definition of a young farmer? Well, let's go to my first slide here. And I don't know, Kathy, if I would put this exactly as my definition. This is what the definition comes from Statistics Canada. They ask kind of what the age range of you as a farmer is. As you can see, the under 35 category, which I think they classify as a young farmer, is obviously in the vast minority amongst farmers, and that 55 and over category fits up a big chunk of that. I would probably go as, into, kind of your early 40s to still be counted as a young farmer. I think what we're seeing today in the industry that makes me say that that's the case is that there's a lot of people that may be, similar to me, that went off, got an education in maybe a different area, had a different job for a number of years, and now have decided to come home to the farm. So even if they're not, fresh out of university, they're still, fairly young at heart with this idea of farming. So that's probably where I'd put that window. But certainly I think, it gives us an idea that certainly when we talk about young farmers, we are the absolute minority in the industry. The challenge that we have going forward for all of us is that, obviously that 55 and over category is, only aging. And at some point, those assets, those investments that those farmers have made have to be passed on to someone else. And certainly, that someone else kind of fits our category. Challenge number one is here in Ontario. We're looking at $131 billion of capital assets, land, buildings, machinery, livestock, whatever it is. There's a lot of capital value. Agriculture is an incredibly capital intense industry, which is why I think as young farmers, the simple idea that we can, just buy out to the neighbor or buy something and just start from scratch, I don't think is necessarily attainable or necessarily achievable. I think we have to come up with some pretty unique ideas to try to become profitable businesses. Just because, as I say, we just can't simply just, buy out that 55 and over category. Certainly I don't think, most of us are in the position to be able to afford that, which is why I think that if you are in the position that you are looking at, taking over a farm, either from a family member or even from somebody else, I think it's really important to have that succession plan, to have that succession discussion. This is not something I'm going to touch on for very long because it's not my area of expertise, but meeting with a lot of young farmers, this is not a surprise that less than 10% of all farms have a written succession plan to go along with them. That is, in my opinion, is not enough. We're not going to get to 100% because some are in, a situation where they don't have anybody coming home, or they're kind of in that middle ground of being done once, being passed on, and the kids are too young to take over. But at the same time, if you're in that position that you want to take over, I think it's really important to start having that discussion. And just out of, kind of fascination that I always enjoy a stat like this is that obviously the number of women involved in the industry are growing at a rapid rate. Certainly it's not that male dominated field, but I think a lot of people think it is. But certainly, when you go out and you visit farms and you see who's, doing the work and all that kind of stuff, it's pretty easy to see that, this is an industry made up of, all kinds of people. So with that, we are going to start with profile number one, or conversation number one, that I think is a good place to start for this evening, and that is with Daryl and Kara. Daryl and Kara are in Eastern Ontario. They're not too far from Tweed, outside of Belleville. And they are beef farmers. That's really what their kind of passion is. The Enrights are, known for, being fairly involved in the beef industry, and that was certainly something that they wanted to do. Unfortunately, like a lot of farm businesses, the money isn't always there. And so they had to come up with, okay, how are they going to be involved in the beef industry? Is it a case of they are going to both work full-time forever off of the farm and have a few cattle, kind of as a hobby? Or would they rather be more involved in the industry and maybe even make it a full-time career? They decided they wanted to make beef farming a full-time career. The challenge, and this is what, Kara will say as well, is that, certainly from the easy standpoint, it would be really easy to just do it the way that their grandparents did. Have some cows around, get them bred, raise those calves, sell those calves, and that would kind of be your living for the year. Unfortunately for them, that just wasn't a profitable option for a variety of reasons. One, to get to that kind of scale, when we talked about, what it would take capital investment wise, that, wasn't something that they were going to be achievable at doing. It wasn't necessarily something they wanted to do. They had to come up with something different. What they wanted to do was more of a direct market approach. They wanted to reach out directly to customers, which I think is, something that a lot of you are, more directly involved with. They felt that there was probably some more value in that. Certainly there's the option of going to, a farmer's market. Certainly in the beef industry, one of the common things to do is, kind of a freezer beef program where you might sell a quarter of a beef or half a beef to someone, kind of all at once. That wasn't the way they decided to go. What they decided to go was go straight to restaurants, and restaurants would be their specialty. That's what they, started doing. A lot of hard work to get in that, where, you're going, kind of door to door, chef to chef, to say, here's our product, can we be involved in, your business as a supplier? And they've worked incredibly hard over the last number of years to get to a position where now, one of them is home full time dealing with that. They're serving Over 60 restaurants between Toronto and Ottawa is basically where their van goes. So a chef calls up the first of the week and says, okay, here's the type of products I would like. They go to the abattoir that they deal with, and then they go fill that order. And one day they go west on the 401, another day they go east on the 401, and they fill all of those orders. So it's become a business that certainly is growing at a pretty rapid rate, somewhere where they can have cattle consistently being sold throughout the year, which is kind of also a nice thing, that it's not as seasonal as what the beef industry typically is, that kind of calving all at once and selling all at once, but something a little more consistent. But then also having that market where it's kind of spread out over different geographies at different restaurants, different offerings, right from actually not too far from their place. I had just kind of a burger place that had their product, right up to some pretty high-end restaurants, in both Toronto and Ottawa. So kind of a neat story that kind of breaks that mold of this is what our parents did, this is what our grandparents did. You know what? This is not going to work for us. This is not going to be feasible. We have to do something differently. The other thing, and you'll see their, fashionable bags that they're carrying, that is not just because they really like bags a lot. That's actually their newest offering. So it was one thing that, obviously a beef animal is wrapped in leather. And, for a long time, that was a wasted product. That was something that they saw zero value out of. And they thought, one way that they could increase the profitability, increase the value proposition of what they were selling, was trying to figure out what can we do with these, this waste material that we're not using. Leather seemed to make the most sense. And so now, they've got these bags designed. They send the leather off to someone else, to put them together. But these are products that are selling for a few $100s. They're a fairly high-end product, but it's a local leather. It's something that people, a story goes with those bags. So I think it's one of those neat things that also challenge you to say, okay, here's the product that I've always sold. They did that and they sold it differently, but then they came back and said, okay, what am I not using on my farm here? What am I throwing away that maybe there's some more value in? And I think that's probably a question that we can all ask ourselves, is look around and say, okay, this is what I've always sold, or this is what I'm thinking I'm going to be selling, but what else can be made out of this? If I'm, pitching something, into the garbage, is there any opportunity there? Am I putting it in the garbage because my parents always put it in the garbage, or am I putting it in the garbage because there really is nothing I can do with that? I think that's kind of, an interesting, challenge. Do they retail the bags or do they wholesale them? They have them in a few different kind of local boutique shops, again, from Toronto to Ottawa. So they've kind of made it when they're on the road selling meat. They throw a few bags. It's fairly new. I think they're all on consignment right now. And then they also have a website. And they're actually to the point where, at least when I was there late summer, they just kind of sent some in, and, they weren't really sure. They had a few kind of in stock, and they weren't really sure if they were going to get rid of them. And then all of a sudden they were all gone and they were out. So they had to go, they were kind of scrambling to find more. So just kind of a neat way. If you want to learn more about Daryl and Kara, it's N Wright Cattle Company. N Wright is E-N Wright Cattle Company, and that's something you can Google or find online. And just kind of see the full story with them. So I think that's just kind of a pretty neat, couple that's just trying to break that mold as to what a farmer is. And I think that as young farmers, we're pretty good at that, as we like to think outside the box. We like to try to come up with things a little different. Kelsey is in the exact same boat. Kelsey is another young farmer, who I always say, we kind of all as farmers ask, what's next? What do we want to do? The N Wrights always do that. What's next? What's our next proposition? What's our next idea to help build profitability? Kelsey does the same thing. So Kelsey grew up in Eastern Ontario, around the Ottawa area. in the market garden business. That was something that her family was involved with fairly heavily, as well as working off farm. She went to University of Guelph. No, she didn't actually. I lied about that. She went through for marketing. I'm starting to confuse my profile. She went through for marketing, but then ended up in Orangeville on her grandparents' farm, and works in agriculture now, in agriculture marketing. But what she wanted to do is she came to her grandparents' farm, and they were doing grains, corn, soybeans, wheat. She obviously had quite a bit of experience on the market garden side, and decided that there was probably some more opportunity there on that, again, that profitability side, something to spread out the season a little bit. And her idea was pumpkins. And so she decided that she wanted to sell pumpkins. And so, she went to her grandfather and said, okay, I'd like to buy pumpkins. And his response, was, are you crazy? Why would you want to grow pumpkins, basically? But they came to a compromise, and, he said, okay, well, here's the first few acres. Let's see how they grow in this soil and this climate. Let's test it before we, get too wild. And she actually did it a little bit differently. For year one, is she actually rented pumpkins. She wasn't renting jack-o'-lanterns. I don't think that would work very well, but she was renting pumpkins from a decor perspective. So she was renting to brides who would have an order of, they wanted these many big pumpkins, this many little pumpkins, this many medium-sized ones, and she would bring them ahead of the wedding. They would use them to decorate. She would collect them, and then she would take them the next week and rent them again to the next wedding. And so all of a sudden she could, it wasn't making as much money as a single pumpkin would selling, but she could, basically rent it out for 4 or 5 weeks through that kind of fall holiday season, something different. The next year, she decided that renting was, taking up a lot. There was a lot of little details to it. She decided that instead she wanted to be selling them. And so she grew the pumpkin patch by she over doubled it. Decided she was going to start selling pumpkins, some of which were, friends of clients she had renting. She would sell for weddings, but then she also opened up the farm and had some games and activities for people to come and spend a little bit of time on the farm. So I think that was kind of something that was, trying a few different things. The renting thing worked, but maybe didn't fit quite what she wanted. Her what's next was, okay, maybe I want to sell more of these, move more of these off, and then instead, have people come to the farm and, just try different things. So I think it's, always kind of important to ask that, what's the next stage of my business? How do I want to evolve it on a regular basis? The other thing that she really likes doing, and the reason she wanted people to come to the farm too, was to give people kind of a comfort of where these products were coming from. She's one that really wanted to, give people a better perspective as to, not just where the pumpkins were coming from, but where things like their grains were coming from, or their beef was coming from, or different things, and have some answers to those questions too. And I think that, interaction was something that she wanted to do a better job of and build relationships. And so I think that's, kind of where her, business has evolved to. And certainly, she'll be asking herself, that's what's next over the winter, to see where her business goes, down the road and into the future. Certainly, she sees opportunities in things like weddings, in things like, farm experiences, giving people that, morning on the farm, afternoon on the farm, day on the farm, that type of thing. Just kind of another neat young story. For the next one, we meet Kyle. So Kyle, we actually have to go to PEI to find him. He is one of these guys that, as a young kid, right from day one, wanted to be a farmer. He played with tractors. He rode, with his dad. He, did all sorts of things. He wanted to be a farmer and take over the family farm, which was mainly, the biggest business of that was potatoes. And that's what he always wanted to do. Unfortunately, life doesn't always work the way we want it to. And Kyle's dad was killed in a farm accident when he was 7. And that dramatically changed the direction of that farm. Dramatically changed, how things would play out for him. And so he still worked on the farm because his grandfather then, kind of took it back over, and were involved in it. And so him and his brother, they were still involved. They were helping his grandfather, but certainly that dynamic was a little bit differently. His grandfather encouraged him, to get an education outside of agriculture instead of in case farming ever went south. And that's something, I've heard from a lot of other young farmers, is that older generation trying, they went through tough times, through times like the 80s, that almost broke them if it didn't. And they just wanted, different opportunities for them, or at least have that fallback. And so he did. And Kyle, as an example, went into the trades, did that, still helped his grandfather farm, but, there wasn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily the most encouraging, thing to be coming home to farm. But he still had that kind of in the back of his mind that it was something he wanted to try. Then his grandfather, was diagnosed with dementia, and it was moving at an incredibly rapid rate. And the family decided it would be best to sell the farm. Kyle and his brother thought that this might be the only opportunity they got to, take over the farm and make the farm their own. But, that's always a tough decision. That's always a big risk. I mean, Kyle and his wife both, they're working off farm, they're working full time, they've got pensions, they've got benefits, they've got 2 little kids to think about, to just say, okay, I'm going to take a risk and, give that up and go in, to enormous amounts of debt and, try to run my own business that's a big, big challenge. But, Kyle's wife told him that, like, this is something you've always wanted to do. If you don't do it, are you going to regret it? And he thought he might. So his brother and him, put in an offer to buy that farm from the family. And, they took it over and they got it. Basically, it was the grandfather's farm Friday, and on Monday, it was their farm without a lot of those skills behind. I mean, they'd been raised in it. They knew, they had a pretty good idea of what they were doing. But, with a grandfather, dementia, and their father killed in a farm accident, they really didn't have anybody to go and ask questions to. But it was something that they were, bound and determined that they were going to do. And I think, from a lot of young farmers that we talk to, one of those things is that, that ability to take on those risks, and that ability to be optimistic about it. There are always challenging days in this business. And it's one thing that, Kyle will admit too, that like every job, there are bad days to go along with the good. But certainly when he's looked back over the last 3 years that they've had this farm, he only remembers the good. And it's one thing that, he's in that position where he's not sitting back and saying, am I going to regret if I never do this? He's actually, living and breathing it like that. So, certainly that ability to, take on those risks and take on those challenges is something that, they took on and a lot of young farmers did. I'm going to go over the next couple briefly in the interest of time. Danielle is a beef farmer from the Calgary area, and her perspective comes at it from the idea, the question that she asks really is, what defines you as a farmer? Her argument is that, in previous generations, a lot of the questions were, how many acres do you run? How many head do you have? How many birds do you have? Whatever that is. It was all about size. Size seems to be the big driver for you as a business. Today, I don't think we're in that same boat as young farmers. I don't think we need to be in that same boat. because, as, Kyle and Kelsey and Daryl and Kara have all, shown that it's not just about being bigger, but it's about what can we do differently to actually impact the profitability. So I think that one of those things, that what defines you as a farmer, is it more about what you're growing? Is it how you're growing it? Is it, you involved in this business is about where you're selling or who you're selling it to. So I think the idea that, we have to just, grow in size is the only way forward for our businesses doesn't necessarily fit. And Matt was another young farmer we chatted with that fit this, exact thing too, is that, certainly bigger is a way forward in his mind, in terms of the business, but it's not the only way. He firmly believes that you can get better, you can get more efficient, you can do things differently to improve your farm. And that improvement on your farm is just as good of an expansion as, simply, buying another farm or buying another area or trying to just get bigger. So I think it's one of those things that, I'd certainly challenge you that certainly, there are opportunities where you may want to get bigger, but don't use that as your, sole driver in your business. A lot of the farmers we talk to have made some pretty neat advances in their business, made big improvements in their profitability by trying to do things differently, by trying to do things more efficiently, and have had quite a bit of success to go with it. Now, the challenge that we all face is one certainly that I think Caitlin talks about too. Caitlin is a grain farmer from Saskatchewan. And she fits the category that I think most of us do in that, she's farming nights and weekends to go along with that full-time job. Whether that full-time job is to, pay the bills or, help build up the capital to, start the farm or whatever that looks like, but, as young farmers, we can be run pretty thin. You've got the farm, you've got the full-time job, you're maybe involved in an organization or two, you've maybe got a young family or new relationships, you've got mortgages, you've got all kinds of things that, put a lot of pressure on you as a young farmer. And I think that, Caitlin, like a lot of other young farmers, know that self-awareness, certainly from a mental health standpoint, is a really, really important issue to me. It's one that, our parents or grandparents probably didn't talk a lot about. It wasn't something you didn't open up to the neighbor, necessarily about all your challenges or concerns or things like that. It's something that we as young farmers are far more open to. We're far more open to have these discussions. We want to have these discussions. And I would encourage you to do the same. Certainly knowing that you are not alone in almost any situation you can think of. There's another person that's gone through that or is going through that as well. And so it's important to have those discussions, whether it be, through, organizations like this, whether it be through, online young farmer groups, whether it be with neighbors, whatever it is, hopefully you have that ability that you don't have to go too far in order to get help. Maybe it's a phone call away, maybe it's a short drive away, whatever it is, to be able to just have that conversation, have that cooling period, and know that, somebody's there on your back. I think that's one thing that, as I said, we as young farmers are better at doing, but we also have to be very mindful that we still have to do it. No matter how good you think you are, still do that, kind of self-awareness check every once in a while. Couple of other points that I want to make before we get into our final profile. And a couple of other, and these are just more kind of common trends that I see amongst young farmers that I think are important. Obviously, here's a young farmer that has too many screens in his cab. For my liking, certainly I don't have quite that many. I wouldn't even know where to start. But I think when we think about, data, When we think about, kind of harvesting information, grain farmers, from what I've seen, are, some of the ones that are doing it probably the most. We see they have, yield maps, GPS planting, fertilizer applications, variable rate seeding, all these types of things. And it's one thing that I think we as young farmers are certainly more comfortable with than previous generations, partly because it's using computers and tablets and phones and all types of things that we're extremely comfortable with compared to other generations. But I think there's also some, kind of neat opportunities with, data and with information. So I'd quiz you to say, and just kind of from something to think about when you leave, is what kind of data are you collecting, from your business? Not necessarily financial. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But maybe from a perspective of, things like, yields, in terms of, do if you're growing, particular fruits or vegetables in certain areas, do you know what area grows best under which conditions? Are you keeping track of, when you put an input into that crop, are you, getting some data back, maybe through just simple weights, something to say, this was more successful than it was last year, or this was less successful than last year, and maybe give you a better idea. Certainly that's, some of the areas. And then as you start collecting data, certainly I've found, more and more fascination. You get comfortable collecting one piece of data that maybe helps you, make better decisions. Maybe you can try doing it something differently. It does not have to be an expensive proposition like this. I know a lot of farmers that just use, an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet spreadsheet or something on their phone. They just make up a bit of a table on there, and they enter, different notes as to, planting, input, harvest, yield, all that type of thing. You don't necessarily have to have it, incredibly complicated. It can be something that, using the technology you've got on your hip, you can kind of develop that self-made data collection system. And I think that's a pretty easy way to get started. As I mentioned, though, the financial proposition is also one that I think we as young farmers have to be better at than our previous generation. Certainly there were, lots of other farmers that are good at, knowing their cost of production and return on investments and, all sorts of things like that. But I think we also have to be more mindful that, the dollars are probably bigger in our case. The investments, the things we have to buy are probably more expensive. The risk is higher. We need to know what things cost, how they impact our business. The example I use, and this brings you to my world in the dairy business, with this Juno, or robotic sweeper. And so what it does is it goes around the barn automatically every couple of hours, and it pushes the feed. As you can see, it pushes the feed closer to the edge of the manger so those cows have better access to it. When cows eat, they're incredibly messy eaters. They just kind of throw it all over the place. So if you didn't have something sweeping this, what you would have after a period of time would be the cows, a space with concrete, and then a row of feed that they can't reach anymore. So you need something to push that in. Before this was available, you would go to somewhere like Home Hardware and buy a broom. You would go and you would spend $20, maybe $30 on that broom, and you would automatically, with your arms, sweep that feed closer. Or today, you can go out and you can spend $20,000 and buy a unit like this. I think one of the things that we as young farmers can do very well is find that return on investment. So this is one of the fastest growing segments in the dairy market because the return on investment is that good. With a broom, somebody has to be there to push in feed. With this robot, it does it morning, noon, and night. It doesn't matter whether you're sleeping in the barn. It just does it by itself. It also is why I've seen a lot of young farmers, if another generation, if a previous generation, ever challenges you in making a capital investment or purchasing, particular pieces of equipment, if you can figure out what the return on investment is, if you know the cost of production, if you know what that, piece of equipment is going to cost, if you know what the yield gain is or the quality gain is going to be, then you can figure out what the return on investment is. And I know a lot of young farmers that do that and then present it to their parents or grandparents or banker or, whatever, and say, okay, here's the plan. Here's how we're going to pay for it. Here's why we need to pay for it. Then all of a sudden the discussion changes. It changes pretty dramatically to say, oh, if the dollars really are this, then we can afford that. Then we can do that. I was talking to an apple farmer just last week on Friday, and he used the example of, trellising up the orchard, something that was never done before. You just planted the trees, and let them grow. Whereas now, the common practice is to spend thousands of dollars on a trellis system that holds those trees up in the event of a big windstorm. You're not going to get a windstorm every year that's going to wreck those trees. But if that orchard's there for, 25 or 30 years, you're going to have a bad wind at some point. And so all of a sudden that, trellis system pays for itself when it protects the crop and it protects the tree. It protects the investment of building that orchard. Same thing with things like, frost fans, that are in things, hail cannons, depending on, your size and scale, you'll know if you do some of these calculations, what that return on investment is and if it's something that's, affordable. And then it also helps to make sure that, you're not necessarily buying equipment just to buy it, just because, it's something you want or just because the neighbor has it, but you can actually figure out if it actually fits your business. So those financial elements I think are really important. Quickly, just in the last couple of minutes, since I'm already out of time, but I'll take 2 more minutes here. The last farmer I want to talk to is about Harris, and he's a farmer in New Brunswick, and I think he sums it up really well, in just terms of, what all of us young farmers are feeling, how we're really excited to be here. I mean, we're well educated, we're hardworking, frankly, we could get a job in almost any industry and almost any business we desired. We have chosen agriculture. We're not here because we have to be here. We are here because we want to be here. We want to farm, and we are really proud of that. I think it's one of those perspectives that, for him to be doing something sustainable, to be doing something that has the environment in mind is something that he's really excited about, that he's passionate about. Whatever the reason that you've, decided that you want to be involved in a farm is something that I think, you should hold on to, and you should remind yourself, have something there that reminds you, on those good or bad days, if the weather turned crappy and, the crop's not going very well, have that reminder to say, you know what, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm doing to continue to hold up that pride. This is, as I said, right off the top, this is a really exciting time to be involved in this industry. People want to know more about their food. They want to know where it comes from. They want to buy it from farmers. We have the perfect opportunity now to take advantage of that, doing something that we're really excited about. Certainly, around our place, our young family, it's something that we're thrilled to be a part of. I hope you guys are too. And hopefully a few of these perspectives have kind of given you some ideas in terms of, some of the things that you can at least keep in mind whenever you're putting together business plans or putting together ideas for how your operation looks like. So with that, I am going to open up my chat section again. I hope I didn't miss too many. Let's start here. Are there, you mentioned data and technology. Are there other trends that you have noticed during your meetings with other farmers? Certainly I think that, a couple of those last things, I've seen a lot of, comfort with data technology, the comfort to, stay communicating too. Like, when we talk about, most of us have, a tool that we can take pictures and videos and send them all around the world or just to the next door neighbor. We're always snapping each other and sending messages and Facebook groups and all kinds of things. I think one of those trends is to constantly stay in communication with other young farmers, bounce ideas off, get ideas of where different things come from. I think that's one of those trends. And then, I think that, certainly in a few of those first, young folks that I talked about is that, that question, what's next? We always want to be advancing our business. Maybe it's not in size, but we always, at the end of every year, always want to say, okay, this was a good year. Maybe it was the best year. Maybe it wasn't. It doesn't matter. How am I going to improve it next year? And at the end of the year, you're going to sit down and say, okay, that was great. How am I going to improve it again? And I think we always want to just keep doing that. Melinda, the question about social media, I would like it to become a follow-up. I'm going to read it out loud, sorry. I will like it to become a follow-unfollow game to get likes. If someone follows me, they wait and then unfollow in a couple of days to increase their following. What's your take on this? Is it a game of follow-unfollow? Yeah, I remember when one business, and I won't use their name because some of you might know, but I remember for probably about 6 months, every week, I got the follow note that clearly they unfollowed and followed and followed, unfollowed and followed. And they did it for like 6 months and it just drove me nuts. I didn't want to follow them. I think it really comes down to what's your perspective on it. I think a lot of people, their hope for it, what they want to try to achieve, is maybe to get the most likes. I don't think that should be your goal in social media. I think social media is about building relationships. It's about, building a community. It doesn't really matter, for you, maybe you're selling a specific product. If you have 10,000 followers, that doesn't matter if none of them are buying your product. If you have 100 followers that are all your customers and they're doing it because they want to stay engaged with you, that is tremendously more valuable than, just having a big following. So I think it's really important around social media is not, just simply to follow and unfollow, but is to, find those people you want to build a relationship with. You want to follow them because, you want to, see what they're doing, but then it's not just about following, but if it's about engaging back with them. Maybe they send you a message that, resonates with you and you send a reply back. That's how they're going to find you. That follow game just gets annoying more than anything. It should instead, be about, that constant engagement, that communication, that building that relationship. As I said, if that's what your, probably what your goal is around it. I don't know if there are any other questions. I think that I think I've got them all here. Certainly, if you do have any more questions, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, Kathy, I'll kind of let you unmute yourself too and see if there's anything else you want to chat about in the next couple of minutes.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Andrew. That was really interesting to hear about those examples of young farmers and the things that they are doing. I want to let everyone know that Andrew will be at the Fruit and Vegetable Convention in February, and there will be a Young Farmers Forum there during lunchtime on Wednesday, I believe it is. So if you would like to hear more of what Andrew has to say, be sure you check that out as well. I also want to remind everyone that we have another webinar coming on February 6th. It's called Handling Courageous Conversations. and it's an HR webinar. So mark your calendars for that. We'll get some reminders out to you shortly. So if there are no more questions, oh, there might be one here. There's one more question here from Colleen.
Colleen, what a great question. Done a lot of advocating for agriculture with various social media campaigns. Do you have any advice for us to get started on a small scale? You know, there's a couple of things that I think, you know, with social media is kind of important. One, you know, we all need to have kind of a goal to go along with it. So what is your goal? If you want, you know, is it advocating? Is it building your business? Is it chatting with friends? You know, those are three very separate avenues to do. I think it's important to, you know, pick something that's kind of your chief objective and make sure that when you are posting comments, you know, it doesn't alienate anybody outside of whatever category you're doing. So to have that goal, to have that little bit of a plan going in. Second point would be audience, kind of along the same lines, is know who you want to chat to, who is your, you know, objective for an audience member. You know, is it somebody your age? Is it somebody older? Is it a mother? Is it a father? Is it a grandparent? You know, is it a, you know, young kid in school, a classroom, whatever that happens to be, kind of fits with that same thing, to make sure that when you are posting stuff, even if it's not directed at that audience member all the time, it doesn't necessarily alienate them. And then beyond that, I mean, you know, from my perspective, it really comes to, you know, just doing it and just, you know, getting involved in it. You know, finding ways that make you hold yourself accountable. The reason I do campaigns is because it holds me to account. If I announce publicly that I am going to do this, then I feel that I can't get out of it. Then I have to do it. Otherwise, you know, we all get into that busy cycle and, you know, we run out of time and we don't think of it for a week or, you know, different things like that. You know, so find that routine, find that objective that kind of gets you going. And then, you know, honestly, it's just about, you know, my first kind of interaction into, you know, Twitter is the one that, you know, has kind of built up the most over the years. I started the same way, and I just, you know, started tweeting, and I tweeted for a while on one subject, and then that didn't really work. So I changed and tried something different, and that kind of worked a little better. And then I changed again, and that worked really well. You know, and I changed a little bit, and it worked even better. So it's, you know, kind of constantly starting from the same place that we all do, you know, just in, you know, getting to it. So. Well, if there are no other questions, I guess what I will do is I will certainly thank you, Kathy, for the invitation to speak tonight. As Kathy mentioned, I'm going to be down at the Fruit and Veg Convention, so by all means, you know, I'd love to chat if you want to have a conversation, you know, before or after, or certainly, you know, in my session, and then, you know, if there's any other thing that I can help with, you know, my social media handles are there. You know, by all means, feel free to reach out, you know, with whatever works for you. So thanks very much for the opportunity, Kathy, tonight.
Okay, great. Thanks again. Also, this will be on the OFMA website shortly. So if someone in your family or in your business was not able to hear it tonight, you will be able to hear it on the OFMA website. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.